At 1:37 a.m., a frantic call shattered the silence of North 53rd Street, Philadelphia. 3 gunshots, 1 victim. Police arrived to a lifeless body under a streetlight, the scene thick with blood and gunpowder. Despite a desperate rush to the hospital, it was too late. Another family's nightmare began, another case file opened. This wasn't just a random tragedy, it was part of a growing, disturbing pattern across America. The story of that night was becoming all too common, echoing in cities and towns nationwide. Over 250,000 unsolved murders haunt America, families left in limbo, justice denied. In 2025, homicide clearance rates have plummeted to historic lows below 30% in some major cities. Nearly half of all murders go unsolved in places like Chicago and New Orleans. The numbers are even worse. The social contract is breaking. Murder is becoming a crime you can get away with. Recent cases in Philadelphia and D.C. reveal chilling similarities. Isolated victims, no witnesses, no answers. Police treat each as isolated, but the patterns are too stark to ignore. Is this coincidence or something far more calculated? Since 1965, over 346,000 homicides have gone unsolved in the U.S., a generational failure. But 2025 is different. The crimes are colder, more calculated, and eerily connected. I've spent months investigating, speaking with families, combing through files, and what I've found is chilling. The perpetrator isn't a reckless criminal. It's a predator, methodical and precise, exploiting systemic weaknesses. Tonight, I'll reveal the evidence and the single detail that could connect these murders into a terrifying conspiracy. Ask yourself, when was the last time you truly felt safe after dark? These 2025 murders aren't random, they're staged. Victims from different backgrounds, killed in nearly identical, witness-free circumstances. Each scene feels artificial, as if meticulously arranged to appear like street crime. The randomness is a facade, the killer's signature is hidden in plain sight. First responders sense it, every detail is too perfect, too controlled. It's a performance, masking a complex, sinister truth. Someone is orchestrating these murders with chilling precision. This new breed of crime is engineered to be unsolvable, crippling police investigations. The killer knows police procedures, erasing evidence and witnesses before the crime even occurs. Detectives hit dead ends, morale and resources plummet. As clearance rates fall, criminals grow bolder. Murder becomes a crime with little risk. For our perpetrator, this chaos is perfect cover. Their crimes blend into the national crisis. They operate with near impunity, hidden in the noise of America's unsolved murders. Let's look closer at the timing of these events, because the pattern there is just as specific and just as telling. All of the victims in every case we have linked are discovered between the hours of midnight and 4 a.m. This is what criminologists sometimes refer to as the dead zone, a window of time when the city is at its quietest. It's a period when most potential witnesses are asleep, when traffic is at a minimum, and when the ambient darkness provides a natural cloak for illicit activities. Choosing this time frame is a deliberate tactical decision, designed to minimize the risk of accidental observation and maximize the chances of a clean getaway. It's the first layer of their operational security. Furthermore, the locations are chosen with the same strategic precision. The victims are all found in what can be described as transitional neighborhoods. These are not bustling commercial districts with 24-hour activity, nor are they sleepy, purely residential suburbs where an unfamiliar car would be instantly noticed. They are the in-between places, areas with a mix of small businesses, warehouses, multifamily dwellings, and vacant lots. These are zones where people are less likely to question a strange vehicle or a person walking alone at an odd hour. It's a landscape of anonymity, a perfect hunting ground where someone can disappear without anyone noticing until it's far too late. This combination of time and place creates a powerful advantage for the killer. It allows them to control the environment completely. They can scout the location beforehand, identifying blind spots in surveillance coverage, and planning their entry and exit routes without drawing attention. By the time the body is discovered, often by a passerby on their way to an early shift, the perpetrator is long gone, having had hours to put distance between themselves and the crime. The delayed discovery also means that the initial golden hour of the investigation, the critical first 60 minutes, is lost before it even begins, giving any physical evidence more time to degrade and any potential trail to grow cold. But there is something more to these locations, something beyond their tactical advantages. It feels personal, almost ritualistic. The consistency suggests that these are not just convenient places to commit a crime, they are places that fit a specific set of criteria known only to the killer. Are they chosen for their proximity to something, or for their symbolic meaning? The police are treating each location as a random data point, but when you map them out, you see a constellation of death appearing across the urban landscape. It's a pattern that demands to be understood, because within that choice of location lies a crucial clue to the identity of the person who stalks the Midnight Zone. But here is the element that truly defies logic, the part of this puzzle that caught my attention and refused to let go. In every single one of these meticulously chosen locations, in every one of these transitional neighborhoods, there should have been witnesses. These are not desolate, abandoned wastelands we are talking about. These are city blocks where people live their lives, where apartments overlook the very streets where the victims were found, where late-night workers pass through, and where the insomniacs of the world stare out their windows into the darkness. Statistically, the probability of a violent crime occurring in these areas with absolutely zero auditory or visual witnesses is infinitesimally small. Yet, in case after case, that is precisely what the official reports claim. Someone should have seen something. Someone always sees something. I spoke to a detective in Philadelphia, a man named Costello, who has been working homicides for 15 long years. He has a weary look in his eyes, the kind you only get from staring into the abyss of human cruelty for too long. He told me something over a cup of stale coffee in a precinct break room that made me rethink everything I thought I knew about these cases. He leaned forward, his voice low and gravelly, and said, "In my experience, in 15 years on this job, someone always sees something. Always. A curtain twitches. A dog barks. Someone hears a car that doesn't sound right." He paused, shaking his head slowly. "But this year it's like people have gone blind and deaf. It's unnatural." This sentiment was echoed by investigators in other cities. They described interviewing potential witnesses who lived mere feet from the crime scenes, people who should have been jolted from their sleep by a gunshot. Yet, they all told the same story. They heard nothing. They saw nothing. It's a phenomenon that goes beyond simple fear of retaliation, which is common in many criminal cases. This was different. This was a pervasive, almost supernatural silence that had fallen over entire communities at the most critical moments. The absence of witnesses was not just a lack of evidence, it was becoming a piece of evidence in itself, a clue pointing to an external force actively manipulating the situation. The problem is that the silence is too perfect, too complete. In a typical urban homicide, investigators can usually find someone who heard a shout, the squeal of tires, or the gunshot itself, even if they can't provide a description of the perpetrator. But in these 20-25 cases, the void is absolute. It's as if the crime occurred in a vacuum-sealed chamber placed in the middle of a living neighborhood. This collective amnesia is the invisible hand at work, carefully and deliberately removing the most unpredictable and dangerous variable in any crime, the human witness. It's a level of control that is deeply unsettling, suggesting a perpetrator who isn't just committing murder, but is orchestrating the entire aftermath to ensure their escape. Let's look at the specifics, because the anecdotes are even more chilling than the general pattern. Take the woman who lives just 3 doors down from where the March victim was found on North 53rd Street in Philadelphia. Her apartment window has a clear, unobstructed view of the exact spot. When detectives questioned her, she told them she was awake watching television when the single shot was fired. An ideal witness. But when they pressed her for details, her memory suddenly became a fog. She couldn't remember what show she was watching. She couldn't recall if she heard the noise before or after a commercial break. Her timeline was a blur, her statements filled with, "I think so, and I'm not really sure," rendering her testimony useless. Now consider the security guard who was supposed to be on patrol in the commercial area adjacent to the DC shooting on Newcomb Street. His job, his sole responsibility, was to monitor that specific zone. His patrol logs showed he was consistently diligent, making his rounds every 30 minutes like clockwork. But on the night of the murder, something highly unusual happened. According to his statement, he suddenly felt unwell and needed to use the bathroom. He was away from his post for exactly 15 minutes, a window of time that perfectly encompassed the estimated time of death for the victim. It was a 1 in a million coincidence, a sudden and convenient dereliction of duty at the most opportune time for a killer. This pattern repeats itself with maddening consistency across every case we have examined. A delivery driver whose dashboard camera mysteriously malfunctioned for the 2-minute stretch when he drove past the crime scene. A resident who heard a loud bang but dismissed it as a car backfiring, despite never having heard a car backfire on their street before. A couple who had a loud argument that would have drowned out any other noise from the street, an argument that conveniently ended just moments after the perpetrator would have been clear of the area. These are not just simple coincidences. This is a deliberate and recurring pattern of witness neutralization, executed with a subtlety that leaves investigators with nothing concrete to pursue. What's truly terrifying is the psychological precision of it all. The force at play here isn't necessarily using overt threats or intimidation, at least not in a way that leaves a trail. It's more insidious. It's about creating doubt. It's about suggesting alternative explanations for what people saw or heard. It's about making witnesses question their own senses, convincing them that what they experienced wasn't important, or was simply a product of their imagination. This invisible hand doesn't just silence witnesses, it makes them complicit in their own silence, building a wall of forgetfulness that is impossible for law enforcement to penetrate. The crime scene isn't just the street, it's the minds of those who live around it. The staging of the crime scenes themselves provides another layer of insight into the mind of this perpetrator. It's not just about making the scene look random, it's about introducing specific elements that are designed to send investigators down the wrong path, to waste their time and resources chasing ghosts. These are not the actions of a common criminal. This is the work of someone who understands the investigative process from the inside, who knows exactly what clues detectives are trained to look for, and how to plant misleading ones that will capture their attention. It's a form of intellectual warfare, a chess match being played on a board made of asphalt and chalk outlines. In the DC case, for example, a single, non-standard cigarette butt was found near the body. It was a foreign brand, difficult to obtain in the United States. This single piece of evidence launched a massive effort by detectives to trace its origin, to check with specialty tobacco importers, and to run its DNA against international databases. It was a promising lead that consumed hundreds of man-hours. But it ultimately led nowhere. It was a red herring, planted with surgical precision to misdirect the entire focus of the early investigation. The killer didn't just clean up after themselves, they left behind a carefully crafted lie for the police to follow, a false breadcrumb trail leading to a dead end. In another case we reviewed from early 2025 in a suburb of Baltimore, investigators found what appeared to be gang-related graffiti freshly sprayed on a wall near the victim. The local police immediately pivoted their investigation to focus on known gang rivalries, pulling in task force members and running down lists of known associates. It seemed like a clear-cut motive. However, a linguistic expert who later reviewed the photos for my team noticed something odd. The syntax and symbols were not entirely consistent with local gang vernacular. It was a close imitation, but it was too perfect, almost like it had been copied from a textbook. It was a fabrication, a theatrical prop left on the stage to sell a story that had nothing to do with the actual crime. This is what makes these cases so profoundly difficult to solve. The perpetrator is not just removing evidence, they are corrupting the evidence that remains. They are poisoning the well. For an investigator, every piece of potential evidence must be treated as credible until proven otherwise. This methodical saboteur exploits that principle, seeding the crime scene with plausible but ultimately false leads that splinter the investigation into multiple, fruitless directions. This ghost in the machine ensures that by the time detectives realize they've been chasing shadows, the real trail has gone impossibly cold. It is a brilliant and chillingly effective strategy for achieving the perfect, unsolvable crime. When you combine the neutralized witnesses with the deliberately staged crime scenes, a terrifying picture begins to form. We are not dealing with a killer who is simply lucky or evasive. We are dealing with someone who is actively controlling the narrative of each murder from beginning to end. They are the unseen puppeteer, pulling the strings of witnesses, evidence, and even the investigators themselves. Their control is so absolute that it extends beyond the moment of the crime and into the weeks and months of the subsequent investigation. They aren't just getting away with murder, they are directing the entire show, with the police and the public as their unwitting audience. So the question becomes, who could possibly possess this level of skill and knowledge? Who has the foresight to plan for every contingency, to manipulate human memory, and to understand the intricacies of forensic science and police procedures so intimately? This is not something you learn from watching crime dramas on television. This level of expertise suggests experience. It suggests access. It suggests someone who has been on the other side of the yellow tape, someone who has seen how these investigations work from the inside out. The invisible hand guiding these events feels disconcertingly familiar with the tools of justice. The psychological profile that emerges is that of a meticulous planner, someone who is patient, highly intelligent, and devoid of empathy. They view the crime not as a passionate, violent outburst, but as a technical problem to be solved. The victim is merely a variable in a complex equation. The goal is not just to kill but to execute the act flawlessly, leaving behind a perfect intellectual puzzle that they know cannot be solved. There is an arrogance to it, a supreme confidence in their ability to outsmart the entire system. This puppeteer is not hiding in fear, they are observing from the shadows, perhaps even taking a perverse pleasure in watching the authorities struggle with the masterpiece they have created. This leads us to the most unsettling conclusion of all. The reason these cases are going cold is not due to a lack of effort or competence on the part of the police. It is because the game is rigged from the start. The perpetrator isn't just breaking the law, they are subverting the very process of law enforcement. They have found the seams in the system and are exploiting them with ruthless efficiency. But who is this person? And more importantly, why are they doing this? Because what my investigation discovered next will take us away from the streets and into the files, where a forensic trail, thin but undeniable, was just waiting to be found. Over the past 6 months of this intensive investigation, my team and I have managed to obtain a wealth of sensitive documents. We have secured police reports, confidential witness statements, and most critically, the preliminary forensic evidence logs from multiple jurisdictions. We cross-referenced these files, searching for anomalies and overlaps that local departments, working in isolation, might have missed. What we found buried within the technical jargon and chemical formulas will not just shock you, it will provide the first concrete physical link between these seemingly separate tragedies, proving they are the work of a single, calculating mind. The evidence was there all along, hidden in the microscopic details. Let's go back to the Philadelphia case, the murder on North 53rd Street that started this entire inquiry. The initial forensic sweep of the scene was challenging due to the rain, but the team was diligent. Deep within the report, past the initial findings, was a curious note from the lab. They had found faint trace amounts of an industrial cleaning compound near the location where the body was discovered. This was not household bleach, ammonia, or something you could simply buy at a local grocery store. This was a professional-grade, phosphate-free solvent, the kind specifically manufactured for and used by biohazard remediation crews and crime scene cleanup specialists. Someone knew exactly how to chemically eradicate DNA evidence from a surface. This discovery was significant on its own, but it became monumental when we found a similar pattern in the DC case. The report from the May 3rd shooting on Newcomb Street contained an almost identical finding. Although the specific scene was different, this one was on dry pavement. The lab technicians detected residual traces of the same family of chlorinated solvents. It was a chemical signature, a forensic fingerprint left behind not by the killer's body, but by their meticulous efforts to erase themselves from the scene. It was a bold and risky move. Using such a specific compound could leave its own trail, but it was also incredibly effective at destroying biological evidence like blood, skin cells, and saliva. This chemical connection is the first tangible thread linking these crimes. It tells us that the perpetrator has access to and knowledge of specialized cleaning materials that are not available to the general public. This isn't a criminal who just pours a bottle of Clorox on the ground. This is someone who understands the science of forensic investigation and is using advanced industry-specific tools to defeat it. They are not just cleaning up a mess, they are systematically scouring the crime scene on a molecular level. This single detail transforms the suspect from a common murderer into an expert in forensic countermeasures, a ghost who knows how to erase their own shadow. The forensic evidence goes beyond just what was removed. It also speaks volumes about what was deliberately left behind. The staging of the crime scene, which first responders felt on an intuitive level, is backed up by the cold, hard data of forensic analysis. In the DC case, the victim's mobile phone was found lying on the sidewalk. This is not unusual in itself, but its location was. The phone was discovered exactly 47 feet from the body. It was not thrown randomly in a panic, nor was it dropped during a violent struggle. Its placement was too precise, too deliberate. It was positioned, almost as if measured, at a specific distance, and had been wiped perfectly clean of all fingerprints, except for a single, clear print belonging to the victim. This act of placing the phone is a form of psychological manipulation aimed directly at the investigators. A phone is a treasure trove of evidence, call logs, messages, location data, and finding it would immediately become a primary focus for any detective. By placing it away from the body, the killer creates a second focal point at the scene, subtly dividing the attention of the forensic team. Wiping it clean of all prints but the victim's is a masterstroke of misdirection. It suggests the victim was the last one to touch it, creating a false narrative and sending investigators down a rabbit hole, analyzing the victim's final communications instead of looking for clues from the perpetrator. This pattern of precise, almost mathematical evidence placement is not unique to the DC case. In the Philadelphia murder, the single shell casing from the fatal shot was found tucked neatly into a storm drain grate several yards from the body. An officer had to use a magnetic tool to retrieve it. This is not where a casing would naturally land after being ejected from a handgun. It was collected and deliberately hidden in a place where it was likely to be found, but only after a thorough and time-consuming search. It's another game, another way for the killer to control the investigation, to make the police work for every scrap of evidence, and to reinforce their own sense of intellectual superiority. This isn't just about hiding evidence, it's about demonstrating control. The perpetrator is leaving behind a message, one that says, "I am in charge here. You will find only what I allow you to find." The precision of placing the phone 47 feet away, or hiding the casing in a drain, is a signature of their personality. It speaks to an obsessive, detail-oriented mind, someone who thrives on order and planning. They are not merely trying to get away with the crime, they are crafting it, sculpting it into a work of art that is meant to be admired for its cold, intellectual perfection. It is a chilling insight into a mind that sees murder as a grand, intricate design. But it was a detail buried deep within the supplemental crime scene reports that made my hands physically shake when I first read it. In both the Philadelphia and the DC cases, separated by 2 months and hundreds of miles, investigators had documented the presence of tire tracks. In the rain-soaked Philly street, a partial impression was preserved in a patch of mud at the edge of the road. In DC, a faint dusty print was lifted from the asphalt near an alleyway. On their own, these prints were considered minor pieces of evidence, too fragmented to be of much use. But when we put the reports side by side, we saw the connection. The forensic labs in both cities had identified the tread pattern as belonging to the same specific type of commercial-grade tire. This wasn't a common passenger car tire you would find on a sedan or an SUV. The tread design, with its unique block arrangement and sipe depth, is exclusively used on a narrow range of commercial or cargo vans manufactured between the years 2019 and 2021. This was the breakthrough we had been looking for. This was the physical evidence that proved the same vehicle was present at, or at least near, 2 different murders in 2 different states. The ghost had a ride. This discovery changes everything. We are no longer looking at a series of isolated incidents that just happen to share some methodological similarities. We are now looking at the work of a mobile predator, someone who is using the same vehicle to travel between cities and commit these crimes. The choice of a commercial van is, in itself, a stroke of genius. These vehicles are ubiquitous in urban environments. They blend in seamlessly, arousing no suspicion as they move through industrial parks, commercial zones, and the transitional neighborhoods where the victims are found. It is the perfect anonymous vehicle for an anonymous killer. This is no longer a case of random street violence. It is not gang activity, a drug deal gone wrong, or a domestic dispute that has spilled into the street. The forensic trail from the chemical solvents to the staged evidence and now the tire tracks points to something far more organized and sinister. We are tracking an individual or perhaps a small group who is methodical, disciplined, and forensically aware. They are using the same vehicle, the same chemical cleanup protocol, and the same psychological tactics. This is a serial operation. And a killer who operates on the move is one of the most difficult predators for law enforcement to catch. But here is a fundamental truth of our modern world. Technology is a double-edged sword. While our increasingly sophisticated perpetrator is using their knowledge of forensic science and police procedure to stay one step ahead of investigators, They're also moving through a world blanketed by an invisible digital net. Every action, every movement in a modern city has the potential to leave a trace, a digital echo they might not even realize they're creating. It was in this digital realm, in the endless streams of data that surround us all, that we decided to hunt for our ghost. We knew that if they had a physical signature, they had to have a digital one as well. It was just a matter of finding it. So, I partnered with a brilliant data analyst, a woman who specializes in digital forensics and has this unique talent for finding patterns in chaos. We started with the most basic and, honestly, the most ubiquitous form of tracking cell tower data. We obtained court-authorized logs for the cell towers that service the areas around each murder, focusing on the critical time window from 3 hours before to 1 hour after the estimated time of death. The initial data was overwhelming, a tidal wave of connections representing thousands of phones passing through the area. But our analysts began to filter, to search for the anomaly, the signal and the noise. And then, she found it. A pattern that was both remarkable and, frankly, deeply chilling. In each and every case, from Philadelphia to DC and the others we had linked, there was a single unidentified cell phone that exhibited the exact same behavior. The phone would connect to a local cell tower approximately 2 hours before the murder occurred. It would remain in the area, pinging off nearby towers in a tight, localized pattern for the entire duration of the incident. Then, moments after the crime was committed, its signal would vanish. It didn't just leave the area, it disappeared from the network entirely, powered down or placed in a signal-blocking Faraday bag. The same phone, connecting to different towers in different cities, but always following the same precise predatory pattern. This was the digital confirmation of our theory. Someone was conducting pre-operational surveillance. They were on the ground scouting the locations, timing the patterns of life in the neighborhood, and ensuring the conditions were perfect before they made their move. Then, after the act was complete, they would go completely dark, severing their connection to the digital world to cover their escape. The phone itself was likely a burner, untraceable to any individual. But its behavior, its consistent digital heartbeat before each murder, was a signature as clear and as damning as the chemical residue or the tire tracks. We now had a digital ghost to hunt. With a digital pattern established, we expanded our search into the public-facing internet, the vast and often overlooked world of social media and online community forums. If our perpetrator was meticulously scouting physical locations, it stood to reason they would also be conducting digital reconnaissance. They would want to know what residents were talking about, the level of police presence, and the general sense of security in their target zones. We began to analyze activity on local crime reporting apps like Citizen and Neighbors, as well as hyper-local neighborhood watch forums and Facebook groups for the weeks leading up to each murder. What we uncovered was even more chilling than the cell tower data. In the 2 to 3 weeks leading up to each murder, there was a noticeable spike in anonymous user activity in the online forums dedicated to those specific neighborhoods. A new account using a generic non-identifiable username would begin to ask subtle questions. They would inquire about recent break-ins, ask if police patrols had increased, or comment on posts about broken streetlights or areas that felt unsafe. On the surface, these posts looked like the concerns of a new or anxious resident. But when you looked at the pattern across multiple cities, it was clearly a form of intelligence gathering, a way to gauge the community's awareness and identify law enforcement blind spots from the safety of a keyboard. The ghost account would never engage in arguments or offer personal details. It would simply absorb information, probing for weaknesses. For the DC murder, an anonymous user on a neighborhood forum asked if the private security patrol for the adjacent commercial district was active 24/7. Days later, the security guard on that patrol conveniently took an unscheduled break at the exact time of the killing. For the Philadelphia case, a new user on a crime app repeatedly asked for updates on police response times in that specific sector of the city. This wasn't just passive monitoring, this was active, targeted research designed to perfect their operational plan and ensure the lowest possible risk of being seen or caught. This social media ghost was a master of blending in. Their posts were so innocuous that they were likely ignored or forgotten by everyone who saw them. But for our investigation, they were a revelation. They demonstrated a new layer of the perpetrator's meticulous planning, showing how they leveraged the very tools communities use to stay safe against them. They were turning neighborhood watch groups into their own personal intelligence agency. The same anonymous, data-driven predator who moved silently through the streets was also moving silently through the digital communities, watching, learning, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The final piece of the digital puzzle came from a place most people would never think to look: the mundane bureaucratic databases of municipal governments. Every city runs on data. Traffic cameras log passing cars, automated license plate readers scan for violations, parking enforcement issues tickets, and business licensing departments keep records of every contractor and vendor. We theorized that if someone was physically present in these neighborhoods, using a commercial van, they might have interacted, however briefly, with one of these automated city systems. Cross-referencing these disparate databases was a monumental task, a maze of different formats and jurisdictions. But within that maze, the pattern held. Our data analysts began by pulling traffic camera footage from intersections near the crime scenes, looking for commercial vans matching the 2019 to 2021 models. The sheer volume made it a needle in a haystack search, but then we had a breakthrough. We narrowed the search to vans that passed through these intersections during the scouting window identified by the cell tower data. Suddenly we had a handful of potential vehicles. In 3 different cities we found the same model of white, windowless cargo van with no distinctive markings, appearing on camera footage within the pre-crime window. It was never close enough to get a plate, but it was there. Consistent. The real connection, however, came from an even more obscure source: parking violation records. In 2 of the cities, a commercial van of the same model had received a parking ticket in the vicinity of the future crime scene in the weeks prior. The tickets were for minor infractions, parking in a commercial zone after hours, and were paid promptly online. To the city, it was just revenue. To us, it was a critical link. It suggested a person who had a legitimate, or at least a plausible, reason to be parked in these transitional neighborhoods for extended periods. They were not just driving through, they were stopping, observing, and they had a cover story if questioned. This cross-referencing of municipal data provided the final crucial element. It painted a picture of someone who could move through these cities and operate with a veneer of legitimacy. They weren't just a ghost, they were a ghost with a plausible identity. They drove a common commercial vehicle. They had reasons to be in these specific types of neighborhoods. They wouldn't seem out of place to a casual observer or even a curious police officer on patrol. They had access. And as we would soon discover, that access extended far beyond the streets and deep into the very heart of the system they were working so hard to defeat. Just as we felt we were closing in on this digital phantom 3 weeks ago, my investigation received a jolt that would change its entire trajectory. I received a phone call, the number blocked, the connection crackling with static. The voice on the other end was aged, weary, but held an unmistakable note of authority. The man identified himself as a retired homicide detective from Baltimore. He said he'd been quietly following my team's published findings online, and that the patterns we were describing, the staged scenes, the witness amnesia, the specific midnight to 4 a.m. window, were stirring up ghosts from his own past. He told me, in a voice heavy with long-held frustration, that he had seen these exact same patterns before. He explained that he had worked on a series of baffling cold cases from late 2023 and early 2024, incidents that were never publicly connected to the wave of murders in 2025, but which bore the identical chilling methodology. He had always suspected they were the work of a single, highly intelligent offender, but his theories were dismissed by his superiors as conjecture. The cases were shelved, labeled as unsolvable gang-related hits or robberies gone wrong, lost in the shuffle of a busy urban police department. Now retired, he had been watching our investigation unfold, seeing his old nemesis resurface with a terrifying new boldness and frequency, and he could no longer stay silent. A few hours after our call, a secured, encrypted file arrived in my inbox. It contained the complete case files for 7 different unsolved homicides spanning 4 states, all from before 2025. As my team and I delved into the documents, it was like reading a prequel to the very investigation we were conducting. All the signatures were there, the professional-grade cleaning solvents, the precisely placed evidence, the victims found in transitional zones, and the frustrating lack of credible witnesses. But in one of these older cases, a murder in a warehouse district just outside of Annapolis, something had clearly gone wrong for the perpetrator. They had made a mistake. For the first time, we saw evidence of imperfection. The killer, it seemed, was not infallible. In this one instance, their meticulous planning had been disrupted. Maybe they were rushed, or maybe they were unaware of a newly installed security system. But this single mistake, this one crack in their perfectly constructed facade, was about to provide us with the first real glimpse of the person behind the curtain. The ghost had slipped, and in doing so, had left behind a fragment of their true identity. The files from the past held the key to the present, and we knew we were on the verge of a monumental breakthrough. The first mistake was a traffic camera. Positioned on a pole overlooking a key intersection leading away from the Annapolis crime scene, it captured a fleeting image of a white commercial van speeding through a yellow light. The angle was poor, the lighting was dim, but through painstaking digital enhancement, forensic analysts had been able to isolate a partial license plate, just 3 letters and 2 numbers. On its own, it was not enough for a positive identification. But when the retired detective had originally run that partial plate through the national databases, it had returned thousands of possible matches. However, it had also flagged one very specific and very strange affiliation. The plate sequence was consistent with vehicles registered to a government fleet services pool. The second mistake was a security system. A private business located on the edge of the crime scene had recently installed a high-resolution night vision camera. The feed from that camera mysteriously cut out, going to black for a 12-minute window around the time of the murder. But in the 3 seconds before the system went dead, it recorded a figure walking purposefully toward the camera's location, presumably to disable it. The image was grainy, but when we enhanced it frame by frame, we could make out a clear silhouette. Someone wearing a durable dark uniform with reflective markings on the sleeves, the kind often worn by utility workers, first responders, or law enforcement personnel. But the third mistake was the most damning of all. In that same Annapolis case, there had been one witness. A man who was working a late shift in a nearby building had seen the white van parked in the alley. He had seen a figure get out. He gave a preliminary description to the first responding officers. But by the time a detective arrived to take his formal statement a few hours later, his story had completely changed. He was suddenly unsure of what he saw. He claimed his memory was foggy, that he might have been mistaken. It was the same pattern of witness amnesia we had seen time and again. However, this witness had done something the others had not. Before he was re-interviewed, he had nervously scribbled down a note describing the person who had come to his workplace and spoken with him between the 2 interviews. The person who had calmly, authoritatively, convinced him that what he saw was unreliable and that getting involved would only cause trouble for him and his family. When we followed up with that witness now years later, he was still terrified, but he confirmed our worst fears. The person who convinced him to change his story wasn't a thug or a stranger. They were wearing a badge. They had identified themselves as a detective working the case. But when we checked with the department, no detective by that name had ever existed on their roster. This revelation was the key that unlocked everything. We were not just dealing with a killer who understood police procedure. We were dealing with someone who was actively impersonating law enforcement, or worse, someone who was a part of the system itself. They were using the credibility and authority of a badge to manipulate witnesses, to control crime scenes long after they had left them, and to steer the official investigations away from any evidence that might incriminate them. The invisible hand was not just invisible, it was wearing a glove of legitimacy. This was how they created the wall of forgetfulness. It wasn't magic, it was the coercive power of a perceived authority figure telling you to be quiet. The pieces began to fall into place with terrifying speed: the access to professional-grade forensic cleaning supplies, the intimate knowledge of evidence handling and investigative protocols, the ability to generate plausible but false leads, like the fake gang graffiti that would be credible to police, the use of a government fleet vehicle that would allow them to move through different jurisdictions without raising suspicion, and most chillingly, the skill to approach and interview a witness in a way that completely neutralizes them without leaving any evidence of overt intimidation. This was not an outsider who studied police work. This was an insider. Our search immediately pivoted. We were no longer looking for a common criminal. We were looking for someone who had, or once had, legitimate access to law enforcement resources and facilities. Someone who could walk into a police station without raising an eyebrow. Someone who spoke the language of cops, who understood the culture, and who could exploit the inherent trust that officers place in one another. The pool of suspects narrowed dramatically, but it also became infinitely more dangerous. We were hunting for a wolf who had been hiding among the sheepdogs. This was the answer to the question of how they operated with such impunity. They were protected by the very system they were betraying. Their movements were masked by a veneer of official purpose. They could potentially access case files to monitor the progress of the investigations into their own crimes. They could identify key witnesses from police reports and target them for manipulation. The perpetrator wasn't just a step ahead of the police, they were walking alongside them, a ghost in their own machine, utterly confident that no one would ever think to look at one of their own. This sprawling, terrifying case represents something far larger and more insidious than just one individual committing a series of heinous murders across the country. It tears back the curtain on the fundamental vulnerabilities that exist within our modern justice system, exposing the deep-seated trust we place in it as a potential weapon. The investigation has shown us, with chilling clarity, how a determined and knowledgeable individual can exploit their privileged access to law enforcement resources, not only to perpetrate monstrous crimes, but to meticulously cover their tracks using the very tools designed for justice. This is not just a story about a serial killer, it is a cautionary tale about the very structure of the institutions we rely on for our safety. Think for a moment about the sheer scale of the ecosystem that surrounds law enforcement. How many thousands of civilian contractors, third-party consultants, and non-sworn employees have legitimate daily access to sensitive police systems? These are the people who install software, maintain databases, repair equipment, and analyze data. They operate in the shadows of sworn law enforcement, often without the same rigorous background checks, psychological screenings, or continuous oversight that uniformed officers face. This case demonstrates that this shadow workforce represents a potential blind spot, a backdoor through which someone with malicious intent can gain terrifying levels of insight and control, turning our protectors' greatest assets into their greatest liabilities. The families of the victims in Philadelphia, in Washington, D.C., and in all the other cities touched by this predator's cold hand deserve the solace of justice. The communities that have been living under a cloud of fear for months deserve to have definitive answers and a restoration of their sense of security. But most importantly, we, as a society, deserve to know that the complex systems built to protect us are not being actively used to hurt us from within. The trust between the public and law enforcement is a fragile, sacred bond. When that trust is poisoned by an insider, the damage extends far beyond the immediate victims of the crime, eroding the faith we have in the badge itself. This investigation has proven that the person responsible for these calculated murders did not just commit crimes against individuals, they launched a direct assault on the very foundation of public safety and criminal justice. They skillfully turned our implicit trust in uniforms and credentials into a powerful weapon of manipulation and misdirection. They masterfully used our collective faith in the integrity of the system as a shield to hide behind while they planned their next move. This is a new and terrifying breed of criminal, one who understands that the ultimate camouflage is not a mask or a disguise, but a position of perceived authority and trust. The complex and ongoing investigation into the unsolved murders of 2025 is far from over. In many ways, with the identification of a suspect profile, it is truly just beginning. But this investigation cannot and must not proceed solely within the closed-off corridors of law enforcement, especially when the system itself has been compromised. It requires your help. It requires the vigilance of every citizen who has a stake in the safety of their community. If you reside in Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, or any of the other cities where these chilling crimes occurred, you must start paying closer attention to who has access to your community's safety infrastructure. You must ask hard questions. Start to question who is being granted access to police databases and sensitive case information in your local area. Demand greater transparency and more stringent oversight regarding the civilian contractors and third-party vendors who work alongside your local police departments. If you possess any information, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, about any of these cases, do not limit your reporting to a single phone call to the local police tip line. Contact the FBI directly to ensure the information is logged at a federal level. Reach out to investigative journalists and established victim advocacy groups. You must ensure your information reaches multiple channels that can act upon it without the risk of internal interference or suppression. Most importantly, do not allow these cases to fade from the public consciousness and become forgotten tragedies. The person responsible for this reign of terror is counting on our short attention spans. They are banking on the news cycle moving on to the next sensational story, allowing these murders to become just another set of cold case statistics in a file cabinet, Keep talking about the victims, keep sharing their stories, keep asking questions and demanding answers from those in power. The families of these victims are trapped in a state of perpetual waiting, hoping for a justice that seems impossibly distant. We cannot allow their wait to be in vain. The communities affected by these events are still living with a palpable sense of fear, looking over their shoulders, wondering if the killer will strike again. And somewhere out there, a person who has exploited a position of trust, someone who has worn a uniform or carried credentials, might be meticulously planning their next move, confident in their ability to outsmart the system once more. It is up to all of us to prove them wrong. Do not let them succeed. Do not let these cases go cold, and do not let the very system that is supposed to protect us continue to be used as a weapon against us. The truth is finally coming to light. Now, we must all ensure that it leads to justice.